On the 8th of November 2016, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in a surprise announcement, made the decision that rupees 500 and rupees 1000 would no longer be legal tender and would be demonetized. The chaos which ensued post this decision is well known, and the following months were tumultuous for most Indians when it came to accessing cash at ATMs. In fact, the opposition termed this decision as another form of an economic emergency which was imposed by the Prime Minister. In the subsequent years, there were up to 58 petitions filed in the Supreme Court which called into question this particular decision. And after 6 years, a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court of India upheld the order passed by the Prime Minister. And this garnered mixed reactions from the Indian public. This is Karan Dev, and joining me today to discuss this is Alok Prasanna, who is the co-founder and lead for the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, which is a think tank based in New Delhi. Now, the Vidhi Center focuses on legal research, and their stated vision is to make better laws and improve governance for the public good. Alok is also a senior lawyer, and his writings have appeared in a plethora of newspapers, journals, and magazines, such as Economic and Political Weekly, The Hindu, Scroll.in, and many others. Alok, thank you so much for taking time out today to speak with me on Swell. I'm going to be following a unique format for this interview where I ask you just a couple of questions and in turn get your reading on the topic. Therefore, quite simply, out of all the things that have been written about demonetization and said in this judgment, what aspects should we as everyday people who may not have legal expertise, what should we pay most attention to, and what aspect surprised you? And secondly, what do you make of the dissenting verdict, which was by Justice Nagaratna? I really hope that this conversation sparks a lot of debate here on Swell, and I really think that this was a judgment that needed more attention from the mainstream media. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your take on this topic, and it's over to you.
Thanks Karan, for inviting me to the platform and asking me for my views on this. To break down the two questions that you have asked of me, the first thing that I think people should really look at about this judgment, and something which I think deserves much more public discussion, is the fact that the Supreme Court delivered this judgment 6 years after the effective demonetization exercise effectively ended. It ended in sometime in 2017. And keep in mind, all the petitions were filed while the notes were being returned. And I think it was incumbent on the Supreme Court, one way or the other, right, to have decided that this is either the exercise is either legal or not legal, or this is how it should be done, or this is how it should not be done. By keeping the matter pending for so long, I think the court did a great disservice to the people. And I think what it has effectively done is it has decided the case without giving a judgment. Now, usually when you go to a court, the court gives a judgment and says, this is why I'm deciding the case. But in this demonetization case, what the court has done is, I've decided the case, I'll let you know why much later. Because this was by de facto, right? By essentially saying we won't do anything while the process is going on, you have given a free pass to the government to do whatever it wants. And maybe 5-6 years later, the judgment comes out and it's all kind of academic for us. I think this is what is unfortunate, and this is what we should be holding our courts accountable for, which is when we approach them, we want a judgment which is effective, one way or the other. Coming to the specifically legal aspect of it, I've said this before and I will repeat it. Legality was not the fundamental problem with the demonetization exercise. The problem really was the thinking behind it, the goals for it, the lack of proper planning, the inconsistency with which things were done, not done. All of those are not legal issues, to be very honest. And holding someone accountable in the court of law is just one way of holding someone accountable. It's not the only way or the best way or the most effective way, and so on. So, which is where I think we should keep in mind that just because the exercise has been held to be legal doesn't mean it was necessarily for the good or for the better. I'm not an economic expert or fiscal expert, but there are enough people who have written about the ways in which demonetization has failed, and you have the numbers about all of that. Coming to the second question, which is Justice Nagaratna's dissent, I was kind of surprised there was a dissent in the first place, because I do think it's somewhat unstated in her dissent, but it seems to be that she has taken this view because she feels this exercise did not have the right impact or the right effect. Let's just sort of understand what she is saying. What the majority say is that the government had all the power under the RBI Act to issue this notification saying all 500 and all 1000 rupee notes can be demonetized. What Justice Nagaratna is saying, you don't have the power to remove all 500 or all 5000 rupee notes. Just some series of those notes you could have gotten rid of. Now, interpretationally, I think the majority is right, because if you see the wording in that act, it is very clear. The intent that Parliament had was that if you want to get rid of an entire denomination of notes, you don't have to keep passing particular legislation. In the past, it was done because the RBI said it's a bad idea to get rid of an entire denomination, but it might be a good idea sometimes. That is not something for lawyers and judges to decide, but for the RBI to decide. So I think her interpretation, to be very honest, is not legally sound. And at the end of the day, it is desirable. We should not confuse what is legal and what is desirable. She makes the point that if the government wanted to get rid of all 500 and 1000 rupee notes, they should have passed the law to this effect. But that is also self-defeating, right? Because if the idea was to fight black money, now not without getting into whether it's the best way or a good way to fight black money, you need to do this so that people with black money don't have an opportunity to get rid of the notes and defeat your purpose. And then she says, no, it could have been done by ordinance also. Now that to me seems like a quibble, right? If you say that it is good, it is desirable for Parliament to do this because you'll debate it, then you can't also mandate that you have to follow a procedure which is self-defeating. So which is where I'm not so sure I agree with the dissent. I think legally the majority judgment was correct on this point. Again, that doesn't mean, and the court also doesn't say this, it doesn't mean demonetization was a good idea. We have to make that distinction.
Thank you so much for that detailed and in-depth analysis, Alok. And I think there will be a lot of things that will be said and written about this judgment in the months and years ahead. And I'm sure that you will have also many petitions filed which might bring this judgment into question again in various courts of law. I think we're due to have some questions which will come to us over the course of the next day or so. But we're looking to do many of these smaller types of conversations where we get into the crux of the matter in just 5 minutes. And, I'd really like to have you back on a lot of similar types of conversations. It's been an absolute pleasure, Alok. Thank you so much for taking time out once again. And we're really looking forward to hearing from some of our listeners and getting some interesting questions. Thanks.
Alok, thank you so much for your response. Some of what you said I did not know, and I found that very informative. So thank you. I had one question, and I'm coming into this as a common man. I'm not very familiar with the law, but from a common man's perspective, typically when we feel that we have been wronged by one of the branches of government, let's say we believe the legislature has wronged us or we believe the executive has wronged us, then our only recourse is the judiciary. We go to the judiciary and we say, we've been wronged by the government in this way. What is the recourse that is afforded to us to help us, overcome the trouble that we've been put through? And in the case of demonetization, while the executive claimed that this was necessary to get rid of black money in circulation, this is not the first time that this has been attempted. The Vanchu Committee was the first to do it in 1946, which was pre-independence. And then Morarji Desai attempted to do something very similar, albeit not very successfully, in 1971. And in both scenarios, it was shown that demonetization remarkably failed, and it didn't achieve the purpose it was meant to achieve. So for an executive to come in and say that here is an emergency order that we're going to put on, it's an executive order, and that will take effect immediately, and it is for this purpose, when it has been shown twice in the past that the purpose has never been achieved, what recourse does the common man have to to counter this and say, look, we've been wronged, and we need some form of compensation, some form of judgment, whatever it may be. Our only option is to go in front of the judiciary. What I don't understand is whether this law was legal or not, whether this action, not law, I suppose it's an executive order, whether this action was legal or not. Isn't there some sort of recourse that needs to be afforded to the common man who, millions of whom lost their complete livelihood with this rollout? Isn't the government in some form or fashion responsible for civil compensation for having done something that has historically been shown to be bad policy? I don't know if that was something that was under the purview of this, but what recourse do common men have when policymakers and the executive fail us, if it is not to go to the judiciary to expect relief? And relief can come in the form of, it need not have been in the form of indicating that the action was illegal. It could have come in the form of civil compensation. It could have come in the form of taxation relief. It could have come in many forms, but aren't the people owed civil compensation for this? And I don't know if that comes under the purview of this particular case, but seems to me that the third pillar of government has not served the purpose that it was meant to serve. And I say this as a common man, right? Not as an interpreter of law or an interpreter of the Constitution.
So let me break down what you said, Sudha, into two things. One, is the judiciary the only place to get remedy? And two, what kind of remedies can the judiciary give? Is judiciary the only place to get a remedy for any loss that you've suffered from the government? No, because in a sense, in a democracy at least, it may not be immediate, but you get to replace the rulers. You can sort of campaign in different ways. You can ask for remedies in different ways. That's the thing. The judiciary is not the only option. Number two, what sort of remedies can the judiciary provide? Here's the thing. The people who challenged this in the Supreme Court, they did not really ask for compensation. Compensation is a consequence of showing damage or loss to you. And it need not necessarily be only from some illegal action of the government. For instance, say people are getting COVID compensation, not because the government did anything illegally, but because a lot of families have suffered, people have lost sole breadwinners, and for all sorts of reasons. Maybe there was a failure in some way from the government. You could say planning for the fallout of demonetization was some sort of failure, but people explicitly asked for it, and a mechanism has been set up at the state level to hand out compensation. But keep in mind, when you're asking for a particular remedy, you have to show specifically what particular loss that you've suffered. Now, obviously, someone who has hoarded a lot of black money can't say I lost that black money, so therefore you should compensate me. But say somebody who lost their earnings or livelihood or whatever it is, that is the unfortunate part of the judicial system. You still have to spend your own resources to prove that you've suffered damage. So in this way, perhaps we should one, think about what kind of remedy the judiciary offers and see what is accessible, but two, also understand that there are other remedies beyond that, and it need not necessarily be only judicial that offers some compensation for what is going on. All of this aside, of course people suffered through demonetization, but in the logic of demonetization, people sort of seem to accept this as necessary pain for some reason. And that is perhaps the larger point. At what moment will people realize this was unnecessary pain? And unless people sort of see that this was unnecessary pain, the small select few who feel that this was unnecessary and unwanted perhaps won't be able to make that much of a difference in the way in which the government acts on this front.
Alok, thank you for sharing your perspective here. and it has been very enlightening for me as well. Of course, I did think, as you did, that this is just too little, too late, and also the fact that I think, as Sudha has mentioned, that the whole purpose of the judiciary, right, in terms of being able to question the executive on various decisions made that impact citizens of this country, in very adversely. Where has that whole, I think at least with this move, that entire process has been lost. It has been reduced to mere lip service, and that is very painful. Of course, we know that we can keep re-electing new people or different parties, but at the end of the day, the question is whether demonetization did really serve the purpose, and why aren't we talking about regulations in areas such as the real estate, right, where black money is still being exchanged, and there are so many rampant practices that are going on, right, regardless of whether there are laws to sort of help us curb these practices. They're still very much rampant. So at the end of the day, when one looks back, one really wonders if it was all worth the pain and angst that millions of people in India went through, right, especially the middle class. So great insights there. Thank you, Alok.